Hi, my name is Soundarya and I'm the creator of Unshackled Club. Welcome to an edition in the Extraordinary Visa Library, where we bring in past recipients of O1, EB1, and EB2 NIW visas to understand their journey and demystify the process to help more talented immigrants like you get these visas. In this edition, we have Debarya Dutta. Debarya has an interesting story. He doesn't currently live in the US, rather, he lives in the UK. But in January of 2023, he began working on his EB1A application because he dreamt of moving to Silicon Valley and establishing a network here. Even though he was hit with an RFE, he eventually got his EB1A approved in August 2023. With a strong background in machine learning and a wealth of experience at companies like Ola and Uber, Debarya is now the head of machine learning at Deliveroo. He hopes to move to the US once he can travel on his EB1A. Debarya Dutta, ladies and gentlemen. Let's dive in. What motivated you to look into the EB1A, given that these are not as common as the H1B? So how did you discover the EB1, first of all, and what motivated you?
Well, how I discovered the EB1, actually a senior from college got an EB1 and we talked about like US immigration for long. So he's a professor in U Florida. So it's slightly easier for him to, because he has publications and stuff. So we talked about EB1A and he actually told me like, okay, you hit up some of the criteria which a EB1A needs. And this is probably an option you can explore. Why I didn't go for an H1B or things like that is it's very hard if you are outside the United States to convince a company to sponsor an H1B if you don't already work in that company. The other options were you join a company, stay there for a year, and move to the United States with an L1A, which is also very tricky because if you get laid off, which is the flavor of the season now, you get out of the country, which with your all your belongings, which is not very exciting, right? Other option was O1, but it would again be convincing an employer to file for you, which is again becomes very slightly tricky. So EB1A and probably EB2 NIW were the only options I could explore. And that's why I started applying for EB1A because it had a low priority date at that point of time.
Yeah, unlike now. But when you were filing for an EB1, you were in London at that point.
Yes, I was in London.
And did you have a company in the US that was ready to get you on board at that point?
Yeah, at that point of time, a lot of companies, when I speak to people, a lot of companies do tell me like, okay, if you already have some sort of authorization, probably I can get you on board. But otherwise, it's like a futile conversation. Like we'll talk and we like each other. Like you like the company, they like you, but you still can't come on board. It's just a futile conversation.
Right. Okay, got it. But you just knew that you wanted to move to the US, though.
That was fairly clear. I think like one is a bunch of friends and around US and the tech. If you are working in tech, probably if you're not a founder, it makes a lot of sense to move to US.
Wait, you're saying if you're not a founder, it makes sense?
If you're a founder, probably it makes sense as well. But if you're a founder, probably it makes sense to stay in India as well because there are so many exciting opportunities in India.
Got it. So you began looking into the EB1. When did you start looking into the EB1 seriously? Like, I'm gonna file this application.
So I spoke to the lawyer I applied through in April last year, and then I decided, okay, and the cost was slightly prohibitive as well. Like it's $10,000, and he said like probably okay, like it's a 50% chance of you getting through. It's like you don't have a very strong profile, but you don't have a very weak profile as well. So probably like 50%, and there's a lot of dependent on like stuff like who ends up being your immigration officer at that point, like. Stuff like these as well come into play if you don't have a you don't have a Nobel Prize or like a tons of citations or stuff like that, right? So I discussed with the lawyer a bit, and $10,000 was probably not a very small amount, right? And to spend that without any thing to get out of it is slightly tricky. So then I procrastinated a bit and I discussed with many more people about what to do and stuff like that. And yeah, in the meantime, my another senior from college actually got an EB1 who had a very similar profile to me. He had a PhD though, like it's slightly different, but he was working in industry, didn't have like a ton of citations, but he got an EB1. So I thought like, okay, probably it's slightly more than 51%. And I started working with the lawyer to understand my chances a bit, and then I paid up for the lawyer in I think February or March this year.
Oh, okay, got it. Oh, so you discovered April 2022, but then you actually started the process February 2023.
In January, probably January and February.
I'm curious, like, what made it go from more of a lukewarm dream to something that is a burning desire? Like, I have to get this. Did something change over the last year that made you pay $10,000 to your lawyer and make the decision to do it?
One is, so I was looking at some sort of, I was exploring options about, so I was looking at some sort of permanency in some place, which caused me to look for options. So UK is a pretty exciting place as well. I think the problem is UK is going through a cost of living crisis and stuff like that, right? Which doesn't make it very exciting as it was probably long time back. Which means like there were options like whether I should, if I'm looking at long term, whether I should move to India or move to other places. And US seemed to be a place where I have a bunch of friends from college whom I speak to on and off. So I do enjoy those personal connections, which is not available other than in India. Of course, India has those personal connections. But looking at these, thinking about not just from career perspective, like first career would be exciting in US, but also thinking about the additional factors and like having permanency in one place is something I was looking for. So that actually goes back to the question around you had asked around why not H1B. So H1B, what I've heard is it still makes you a bit dicey around things. Like changing jobs is slightly tricky, like you have to transfer and stuff like that. So that's why I didn't want to go through that pain.
Absolutely. And once you started the process, diving into your EB1 application, what was your niche that you chose to be an expert in?
So my niche was, so when I had started applying, my niche was data science and machine learning, which is a very, very broad niche to have, right? It's not a niche you can get through. Like there are so many ton of smart people doing that at the moment. So then I started narrowing it down to a bit. So if you look at my career, I've largely worked in like delivery, ride hailing kind of companies, like all my career. So I started going through that niche, like machine learning for supply chain and supply chain optimizations, which made my niche a bit more accurate. Like there are a ton of people who do machine learning in supply chain, and that's what I started building around.
Wonderful. And when you were filing this visa, were you also working on machine learning and supply chain optimization at your company?
Yes, I was.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And so once you decided on the niche, I noticed that in terms of your top 3 criteria that you filed for, there was high salary, critical capacity, and was it publications?
I had filed for I think 6 of them initially. I got RFE'd on except one, all of the others. And then my lawyer suggested, so I changed lawyers within the same firm. Like the firm changed lawyers for me, and the new lawyer suggested I don't defend a few RFEs because they're slightly undefensible. And we stuck to high salary, judging criteria, which didn't get RFE'd in the first try. So it was already there. Critical capacity and original contribution. Like you could say that as publications.
Wonderful. So let's go one by one then. So there's let's actually do the top 3. High salary, critical capacity, and judging or original contribution. Which one was it?
So judging didn't get RFE'd.
Okay.
And critical contribution got RFE, but I defended on that.
Okay, wonderful. Let's start with high salary. So high salary is where you have to show that you're in the 90th percentile of people getting paid in your job and your location specifically.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what kind of evidence did you pull together to satisfy this?
Okay, I'll go through like two things. One before the RFE and after the RFE, why I got RFE.
Yeah.
So initially I had submitted stuff like bank statements, a payslip, and some sort of evidence. So there's a company called Michael Page which does some survey around salaries and generate documents around those. Like let's say they do like how much data scientists in London get paid and stuff like that. So I got RFE. Basically, what the RFE said was so the payslip was not signed like signed by a pen. It was or computer generated. So that was RFE. So they did say they said like Michael's Page is not a very well-renowned organization which does survey, so I won't accept that. So they and the suggestions of the RFE was you look at Department of Labor salaries, which is not applicable for me honestly because I don't live in the US, so I can't like say like the salary in Chicago and salary in London is similar or something like that, right? Another is they suggested you take up media articles and show like media articles from more reputed organizations like the Guardian or stuff like that, which shows like okay, data scientist salaries and stuff and so forth. And bank statement was also not signed by a bank manager, which is probably a miss from my end. For official things, you require like a sign from the bank manager. So I got those signed, the payslip signed, the bank statement signed, which showed like a transfer. And I picked up media articles of from Guardian and a few other newspapers around, which said like, okay, data science, those headlines like data scientist is a high paying job and stuff like that. So which said like what the average salary of a data scientist in London is. And I got paid a bit more than that. So from the payslip, which corroborated that. And I also submitted like my past jobs, my job in Dubai, which also had a similarly high salary, and bank statements around those as well.
Wonderful. It also sounds like they helped you with the RFE by telling you exactly.
Yeah, definitely. Need. Like for all the criteria, they actually told me like what would they expect and what did I provide.
Wonderful. So high salary seems like a pretty straightforward RFE response, what you had to do.
Yeah.
Talking about critical capacity. So critical capacity is where you have to show that you play a critical role at a distinguished organization.
Yeah.
So there's kind of two parts to this. How did you provide evidence for both of them?
So, okay, critical capacity was slightly tricky because it's very open-ended, right? You can say like, okay, everybody thinks their job is very, very critical to the world and the company in general, but how do you prove that? What I had submitted, so this also got RFP'd. So what I had submitted was a recommendation letter from like a reference letter kind of from a senior executive in my last company, which showed like why I was critical to the project. And also I'd filed a patent, which was used by a bunch of other companies, and I got documents like why it was very interesting to the world in general. So what the RFE said that one was the letter was not written in the letterhead of the company. Usually people don't really write letters in letterheads. Of course, in official documentation, people do, but a lot of people like just write it on the white paper and upload it, right? So that wasn't accepted by UCIS. And also they said like, it's very difficult to understand from the letter what your exact contribution was to the project. So it said like, Debarya has worked on this project and led a project, a bunch of things like these, but not really saying like things like, okay, he had written the code or he had coordinated among teams or what your exact contribution was. So I went back to the executive and redrafted my letter. It exactly showed like what other people had done, what I had done, and what the impact was to the company, like how much percentage of profit it did and how did we establish that. And also corroborated that with some media articles about the launch of the project. So it was a mass transportation project we had launched in Cairo. And there were some media articles in like Egyptian newspapers about showing like, okay, this is launched. And there was like a small statement by the executive who had written the paper, like, okay, we are very excited for this launch and stuff like that, which we highlighted. Okay, so this executive was basically aware of the project, and so that showed like that established critical contribution a bit. So I filed for like two things of critical contribution. One was this, another was very similar with similar RFEs. The other thing was, so they say critical contribution in an organization of repute. So because I was working in a fairly large company, which, so I assumed like it would be obvious why it's an organization of repute, but that was RFP'd as well. So I wrote down like I put in documents about like the president of the United States talking about like why it does a bunch of things and stuff like that. It's filing in the NYSE, in Nasdaq, and basically annual reports about profits and annual reports about these. So which kind of corroborated like why it's an organization of repute.
And you're saying, so in the beginning, you only submitted a letter without a letterhead from one of your executives, but then later on, you added this mountain of evidence, is it?
Yes.
Oh, I'm kind of surprised your lawyer didn't ask for more in the beginning, in terms of the evidence. Did they tell you why they didn't ask?
No, actually, I had put in a bunch of things around like the project generally, some articles about, but it wasn't like in a big newspaper. It was more in a company blog, so which was basically rejected by UCIS, which was pretty obvious, right? So yeah, interestingly, I had submitted like 10 recommendations letters, and the lawyer said like, okay, we'll go with 3 because we don't just want to dump a bunch of paper on UCIS and hope they'll figure it out.
I've heard that from a few lawyers as well, is that the more letters you submit, you're almost diluting the substance of your application through just letters
probably
instead of
probably that works.
Great. So critical capacity. Also, it sounds like the RFE was helpful in telling you exactly what they need, and
exactly.
You could easily gather the evidence for that.
But what I have also noticed about speaking to various other people, it's a standard boilerplate response to RFEs. Like, this is what you need. Like things like your payslip should be in English and things like this, which were already in English, so it was probably boilerplate, which they gave it to everybody.
Oh wow. Okay, that makes no sense. And no, I've heard that too. And okay, so critical capacity, you did this. Just one last question on this is, in critical capacity, what was your role when you filed the EB-1A at the company?
So so this was for my previous role. So my role was more like senior manager of data sciences. So I wasn't like coding actively, but I was managing the project out and breaking it down into smaller bits, and generally contributing to like understanding why the project should happen, writing a bunch of articles around to simplify the project a bit, and generally coordinating around with external folks and stuff like that.
Gotcha. So, I mean, your title has the word senior manager, so that makes sense. I was just curious as to what exact title you had when you filed. So, and that's the second criteria. Third, coming to original contribution. This is, I realize this is objectively one of the harder criteria to provide evidence for, because you have to show you've impacted your field as a whole, like field of machine learning, data science, and so on. So I'm curious how you did that.
Yeah, it was very tricky. Actually, it's a good observation. I think I got RFE'd for the same reason, which showed like, and the words written were the original contribution should influence stuff out, like things outside your company as well, and across your field entirely, not just your company or your team and things like these. So interestingly, what happened was I had filed a patent which was for optimization of multi-category vehicles, like and that was used in a ship company to use it for multi-category ships. And it was also used by a company in China called Didi, which does ride hailing and stuff like that as well. And they had cited my patent multiple times. So And we also had a conversation, like when they were using it, we had a conversation over email. So I reached out to them for a letter, like if they would be willing to provide a letter. Yeah, sadly, the guy who was using the recommendation, using the patent, had left DD long back. But they connected me to somebody in DD at that point of time who wrote some sort of a very basic reference letter, like, "Hey, we are using it because it is causing some impact for us." Um, there was a ship and a logistics company which used the patent, which also wrote like a more detailed letter. And it was slightly difficult for me to tell these people that, hey, I want this in my letter, and it would look too much imposing because I don't have a personal connection with them. My only connection with them was over email and probably one or two chats. Other than that, it's very difficult to tell them that, hey, I need this and I need this in my letter and so on. Thankfully, the guys in the ship company wrote a long letter about how it impacted their company, how I have provided help in the patent, and iterated through that as well. So, which kind of showed like how my patent has influenced things outside the company as well, like a ship company and DD, which are two fairly distinguished companies, which showed like influence across the field and not just within this. So interestingly, what my lawyer had done, so I had a few more other publications, but which were like very one citation, two citations, and so on, and which my lawyer didn't try to defend at all. Like they didn't put it up like for the UCIS to look at it. So they just went behind one patent, which had credible impact outside companies.
Very interesting. And generally when you file patents, when you're working for a company, the company owns the patent. So I'm curious, in your case, did Uber not own the patent that you had created?
They did, but they did write down my name as an author or something like that. So I had two people, and so another point of the RFE was like how much was your contribution and how much was the other guys. Yeah, thankfully I was in good touch with the other guy, so he wrote a long recommendation letter for me, like what was his contribution and what was mine. So he was more like in product, so it was slightly different. His contributions were slightly different.
Gotcha. And so for original contribution, it sounds like you, once again, battling the RFE meant getting more concrete letters.
Yeah, more concrete letters and showing why it impacted stuff outside the company. Before the RFE, I did submit the letters from DD and the ship company.
Okay, gotcha. I guess, so the only category they actually agreed for was judging, which is the fourth.
Yeah, and interestingly, it was probably one of the loosest categories I had.
My God.
It was like it was something which everybody who files for an EB1A does. I think this is probably everyone who does EB1 knows this Cody Awards and Stevie Awards. And I filed for both, and these were the judging criteria I had, so which were pretty loose to be honest.
And you're not the first person to tell me that, where this other person whose story I covered in my book, Unshackled, he talks about how of the 6 criteria that he submitted evidence for, they only accepted, I think, 1 or 2. And the one that they accepted was judging, for which he had the least amount of evidence. So it just didn't make sense to him why they didn't, consider all the other categories. And that's why lawyers also say USCIS is more forgiving when it comes to judging than all the other categories. But once again, it could change because it is subjective from officer.
If probably like too many people start applying with Stevie Awards, okay, this is probably very.
I think they're already recognizing that. But anyhow, without going into the like macro trends, in your case for judging, did you only submit Cody and Stevie Awards? That is it?
Yes, that's it.
And maybe, it'll be helpful for someone who's watching this to understand, how do you even judge? Even though these competitions are now widespread, what's the first step you took to be on the panel?
I think they do. So you apply for becoming a judge, and it helps. Like I think what I've observed, like if you are working in a slightly big name company, it helps you get through. versus so they don't you don't really write a letter or stuff which can prove your ability. So you just submit a resume and hopefully they judge you based on whether you have a good resume or not. So it becomes slightly tricky. So and you don't have any way to express like how awesome you are. So that becomes slightly tricky. And once you are selected, you basically, so they put a few things like, let's say technology entrepreneur of the year, and they'll submit like, okay, so Saundarya is a technology entrepreneur of the year. Do you think like they'll put up a bunch of things and you score Saundarya based on what you think, how well she is compared to a few other people. So there isn't a very objective way to say like, okay, she's a 10 or she's an 8 or she's a 5 or whatever. So you get like probably 100 odd technology entrepreneur of the year applicants to judge, and based on that you give scores to them. And there are probably other people who are also scoring them, and then based on that they take a judgment like, okay, this is probably the first, she's first, she's second, and so on.
Got it. Okay, so in your case it was very simple. You just applied and you got it.
Yeah.
How long did that take from application to getting the acceptance email?
It took me about a month, but it depends on when you apply. So these awards happens once a year. So if you apply, for example, just after the awards have happened, it will take you probably a year to get in, because they don't need people immediately. But if you apply just around the deadline, you can get a response very soon. But there's a downside to it as well. Let's say you apply very close to the deadline and the positions of the judges are filled, so you don't get in.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess maybe 3 months before is a good period of time.
Yeah, 3 months is a good time. Or there is no harm in actually applying a year before, because if you're not applying to EB1 immediately, might as well apply early and keep it.
Awesome. Very interesting, like, turn of events in your application. So they gave you judging, they gave you nothing else, but they gave you a lot of information on what they need.
Yeah,
and then you
I actually applied for a few other criteria as well. We can talk about those.
Okay.
So I applied for membership in distinguished organizations, which was also RFE'd. So you know, so it was the reason was slightly tricky. So they said, like, if you're paying membership fee to an organization, even though there's a acceptance criteria, they don't really like those. So that becomes a bit more tricky. And so they asked, like, what is the criteria? Like, show from the website, what is the criteria for accepting in that organization? Who decides whether you're in or not? And how is it a distinguished membership association?
And what was the organization that you were a member of?
So yeah, two things. One, I was an IEEE senior member, and a Royal Statistical Society in UK. So I'm a statistician by education. So so the Royal Statistical Society in UK and the IEEE.
Well, those sound very prestigious to me, and I know IEEE senior member. Someone told me recently that they don't consider that anything.
They don't actually. Yeah, they don't, because so the RFE actually said like for IEEE you have to be a fellow to get like and a fellow is a pretty big deal, I guess. You have to be, like, most fellows I've seen are pretty experienced in the industry and very, very well known. So it's not very trivial to get a fellow right away. So I started pitching more on the Royal Statistical Society, because I imagined there aren't a lot of statisticians applying to a EB1 visa, so which makes me help me stand out a bit. And because it's not a very big organization like IEEE, it's slightly easier for me to approach like the secretary there to ask them for a letter about why it's distinguished and stuff like that.
And is that what you did? You got a letter from the secretary of the Royal Society?
Yeah.
Wonderful. And did the Royal Society also have the bylaws, which is what they asked for, right? Like, what is the criteria to get inside? You took that off the website, is it?
They did have the bylaws, and that's where the letter came in handy. So it isn't like, it isn't as like transparent as in like, they don't tell you like, okay, this is the criteria and stuff like that.
Okay, got it. So memberships, this was it. You got the letter and you submitted back. So
letter, and also we attach some proceedings of the Royal Statistical Society about why it's distinguished. Like there's the prince he was then the prince, and now he's the king, who is like who's the presiding officer, and other such distinguished people who are presiding officers.
sounds very prestigious to me. And any other criteria you applied for besides these 5?
I applied for another thing, like appeared in media articles, which my second lawyer suggested not to defend in the RFE, because it was very shaky. Like I had appeared in a bunch of podcasts, which didn't have a huge amount of traction. Another is I had written an article in Times of India, which is like a very well-known newspaper in India, right? But because it wasn't super related to what I'm doing, like
Right.
supply chain and data science, so the lawyer said, like, don't meddle up your application with too much information. So I took that out. So it was more like general technology and education.
That makes sense. I also think with press, it has to be about you and your work, and it has to be around the niche that you're filing for. So
and it's also like I think what my lawyer had said then was it should be self-edited, because I had written that it was more like a open letter kind of thing, which they said like somebody else should write about you rather than you writing about yourself or writing about any stuff.
Yeah, that's true. And also, I know for a fact that they also don't really like it when it's written by a staff contributor versus a journalist. So it has to be like a journalist under payroll in that company. That's something I've observed as well. So awesome. So you filed for 6 categories in the beginning, and then in the second time, you did 5.
Yeah, actually, 1 was accepted beforehand, so I didn't meddle around with those.
Okay.
So other than that, 4.
4 more, huh? So once you hit send on the application the second time around, I'm curious, how were you feeling at that point? Did you feel hopeful that it's going to come through?
Yeah, I had little hopes, because I was RFE'd. So, with RFE, like people say, like, and another thing was I'd applied to the Nebraska Center, and people always say like Nebraska is always very tricky. This is more anecdotal. I don't know evidence about people applied from Nebraska versus Texas who didn't get in, and so on.
Right.
And because I was not living in US, I had the opportunity to apply anywhere, right? So Texas or Nebraska. And I discovered this after applying, so I couldn't do much about it. Of course, my view was, so when I started applying, I thought like, okay, if I get through once, it's fine. I'll apply twice. Like if I don't get through now, I'll apply again, and that's it. Like I won't go on applying multiple years, because it takes some money and it's a lot of effort as well, right? I was like, okay, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, like probably in a year or so, I'll see which criteria I didn't fill in and try to work on those, and again apply in a year or so.
So it sounds like you were actually not hopeful, not optimistic at all, very like grounded in your emotions at that point.
Yeah, it generally helps people. It helps me definitely, like not expecting stuff a lot, and like if it happens, it happens.
Before we talk about some of the emotional aspects of this whole journey, I'm also curious, how is it working with your lawyer? Any insights you have to share with someone who is looking for a lawyer themselves right now?
I think what was really good about my lawyer is they didn't ask for a ton of like documentation, like get me hundreds of recommendations letters and then I'll choose. And like it was mostly me pushing through, like, okay, I can submit this recommendation letter versus this, like 10 of them, which was pretty good. Like, because I thought like probably 10 would make me safe rather than 3, which the lawyer had 3 or 4, which the lawyer had suggested. And I was like, okay, let me put in as many recommendations letter as I can. Another is, which I found a bit annoying, like the lawyer would respond very slow. Like they take like 15 days to get around to an email, which was slightly annoying for me. And especially when you are in this process, you are, it's very exciting for you, right? Maybe not exciting for the lawyer, because they're doing like hundreds of such cases every day. And they would get like reply to your email like after two follow-ups and after 15 days have passed, and a small query as well, which is slightly tricky. Like if you can manage with your patience, probably. I don't know about other lawyers if they're very fast about things. Yeah.
I think good lawyers are generally, they try to be very fast. I know lawyers who are very slow and lawyers who respond within a day, whatever happens. So
Yeah, that
in your
wasn't my
case,
experience at all. No, no, I never got
okay.
a response within a day.
Wow.
It was very like it took usually 15 days, and usually like even if I followed up, usually the lawyer's assistant would reply like, okay, she's looking into it, hold on, and that too after 7 days rather than like within a day. So
Wow.
it's a matter of patience. Like if you can be very patient with the lawyer, is pretty good.
Yeah. And so do you, in your case, how did you choose the lawyer? I'm curious, did you go through a few lawyers before deciding this is it? And
Yeah, I did actually. So I first applied to Victoria Chen, who gives you a refund if you don't get through. And I applied, and she didn't take my case because she said like too few citations. Um, and so then I applied to a few other lawyers who would take very long already before applying as well to get back to me, which so the lawyer I went with was very prompt before I paid the money. Like not the lawyer, but the admin team was very, very prompt before I paid the money up. But after I was handed off to the lawyer, it became a bit slow. And why I chose this lawyer, they had dealt with a lot of similar cases, similar to mine. Like not a lot of academicians. So I'm not an academician. I don't have a PhD. They had filed an EB1, O1 for many people in the industry who is working in startups. A lot of founders as well. Like not like super big league founders, but people raising seed, pre-seed kind of founders who went through them and got in. So it gave me a more confidence about. That they are more suited to my cases than say Victoria Chen. Victoria Chen was probably if somebody gets through Victoria Chen, like if she takes cases, it's pretty great. Like it's half the cost. They give you money back if you don't get through, which is pretty exciting.
Gotcha. But then they also they don't work with people with your profile as much.
Yes.
So
yes.
You wanted someone who's worked with engineers and data scientists before. So
yeah, exactly.
Makes a lot of sense. And that's how you chose your lawyer. Like that was your kind of indication that this is my lawyer to go to.
Yeah.
But then you also changed lawyers after the RFE.
I didn't change the firm. The firm was the same, but the lawyer within the firm changed.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
So like there was nothing like there wasn't any additional cost from me or generally like a huge push from me required as well.
Awesome. And lawyers is one part of the application. Besides the evidence itself, there's also recommenders. You mentioned you got 10 recommendation letters, but then you only used, did you use all of them or only a few?
No, I didn't use all of them. My lawyer suggested like I use only 4 of them based on what we read from the recommendation.
Got it. And so how did you choose these recommenders? Was there any, what was the like mental model you used to choose these 10 people?
So one is, so it's I find it a bit more uncomfortable to reach out to people I have not reached out to in years to ask them for a recommendation. A lot of people are very comfortable doing that, but it's slightly uncomfortable for me to do that. So I generally looked at people who are whom I'm close to. Like I still talk on and off or talk about work stuff maybe once a month or so on. And I didn't go to very senior executives like I had worked with a CTO in the past, but I didn't want to go to him as well because one is I didn't have a very personal connect with him, and also I imagined that if I ask for a recommendation from him, the turnaround time will be very high, like because he's doing stuff right and a lot of other very, very important stuff. So I set expectations with people as well when I asked recommendations about how much time I would want the recommendation to come back to me, and that actually helped me narrow down my list. So to summarize, some people with like good profiles, like holding good positions in the industry, went to good colleges and stuff like that. Because what the lawyer suggested, you write the recommendation, the people recommending write about what their profile is before like writing about me. So it makes sense to get it written from people who will have credibility in terms of in front of the UCIS versus people who are great, but the UCIS probably won't recognize them as great.
Gotcha. So your strategy was to kind of pick people who had credentials, because that's you need that.
Yeah, that was the first
letter.
filtering mechanism.
And
that was the first filtering mechanism, like people with credentials. Otherwise, it would be probably a losing battle.
Exactly. And that makes sense. That's like the threshold, basic threshold you need. And beyond that, it's interesting that you had two more, which is people who you were in touch with on a regular basis, and people who could give you a fast letter and not have a months-long turnaround time. So that's interesting. Well, jumping into the last section of this interview, I'd love to hear about, we briefly talked about the emotional aspects of the application. So I'm curious, what were the emotional challenges that you faced over the last year and a half as you were going through the application, and what helped you cope in these moments?
One is, when you start applying for an application, especially somebody in my situation, like somebody who's not working in US, like getting through this visa means you'd probably have to leave your job and job somewhere else. So you start thinking less about the current work you're doing and think more about like what comes ahead, which becomes slightly dicey, right? So it's a good balance to think about those. So and I think once you pay up a lot of money, like $10,000 to a lawyer, you end up spending a lot of time on the application, which it's very important to draw boundaries about how much time you would spend on an application. So, and in terms of hours per day or hours per week, and in terms of a number of weeks, you would do that as well. Like you can, if you are especially a perfectionist, you would want to spend days and days and days and days and never file. Right. So I think first is I decided on the number of hours I'll spend per week and nothing more than that. The number of people I'll approach for the recommendation. Of course, everybody I wrote to get a recommendation, a lot of people were like dicey and didn't give me a recommendation. So that was something as well. So and number of weeks I would spend. So of course you could decide it based on tasks as well. Like you take like 10 things and finish it and then do it. Or you could decide it based on like number of hours you'll spend in the total and then file it. So I decided based on number of hours per week and number of weeks I would spend in total to get the visa out. And so that helped me keep cool over things generally, like not think about the visa process a lot, and like go on with my day-to-day work outside those visa hours.
That's great. I can't stress this enough. Like filing these visas can seem like a full-time job, especially when you have to gather the evidence in those few weeks and months. So
and especially
so
if you don't have a lawyer, it's like I have a close friend who did this, like an academician who did this on own. It was very, very tedious, like very little information. He had very little information. And there are tons of opinions on the internet, right? Like, and every internet is all over the place. Like there's somebody who says like you submit hundreds of recommendations letters, not hundreds probably, that's an overkill, but tons of recommendations letters. It's good. Somebody like me would probably say like quality over quantity. And if you're filing on your own, it just gets so confusing, and you end up spending so much time over it that it often affects your main job, which is something I think you shouldn't compromise on. Like that's your, if the visa doesn't go through, you have to maintain your main job as well.
Right. Okay, so the next question you kind of answered already. I was going to ask, what did you feel was missing during the application process? Something that you wished was there, but wasn't. You kind of hinted at by saying that there was this dichotomy of information where some people were saying, do this, but the others were saying exactly the opposite, and you just didn't know how to decide.
I think having a peer group, like a verified peer group who've already gone through the process, this was something I was lacking. I had a few friends, but not a ton of friends, and especially friends in my exact situation were lacking, and who could give me correct information about things like these. And generally, a lawyer would give you a lot of information. But the information would be more black and white. They won't keep your situation into account while suggesting these. So, for example, I can give you an example. So, after your I-40, you have to file for a visa, something like that. And given that, so I'm born in India, so your priority date is very far away, like when you can file for it. So, if you if you pay the visa fees now, and your priority date doesn't become current in a year, it just goes to waste. So things like these can be suggested more by people in your situation rather than the lawyer. Lawyer will give you more like information which is probably available on the internet, and because I think they have to correct themselves as well. They can't just give information based on how they feel versus.
That makes sense.
So
I
yeah,
didn't know that myself, what you just shared, actually. So that's helpful to know.
Yeah. Actually, my when my lawyer asked for this, and I discussed with my friends, and they said, "You don't pay it now, otherwise it's just going to go to waste if your priority date doesn't become current." I think they're doing something around moving it to 5 years now instead of whatever. Not sure if it's the exact same thing but it's something else.
I don't think this is that. They're extending the EAD period to 5 years instead of 2 years. So something slightly
makes sense. So I think this is only for people who are not in the US. So you have to pay this fees to the National Visa Processing Center. So and that goes away in a year if you don't apply for the visa.
Got it. Wow.
and because your priority date is not current, you can't apply like theoretically, and still it goes away even though it's not your fault. So a friend actually told me that, and I asked the lawyer, "Hey, should I not pay it?" Okay, yeah, I didn't notice that this thing, but yeah, good call out. You should pay it. Which is so having a set of like a verifiable information which is trustworthy is something which I was lacking in.
Well, coming to the last question, I want to know, if you were to do the whole process again, is there anything you would do differently? And this is another way of saying, what is something you would tell a younger Debarya who is starting his process right now?
One is, I would definitely say start applying earlier rather than later, because if I had applied like a year before, my priority date would be a bit different, which would be great, I guess. Another is, like, of course, the lawyer mentioned this multiple times to me that don't go over quantity of information, like don't try to dump a lot of information to UCIS and get only like few recommendation letters, some information about companies to prove that they are reputed, not just dump like hundreds of pages of information. So going for quality over quantity, and applying it as soon as you think you are ready. Like don't procrastinate it, and make this trade-off.
That's very solid advice. Thank you so much, Debarya. I think you're the first data scientist that we're having in the case study library. So I'm very excited.
That's great
also
to hear.
The first person from the Royal Society of Statisticians. Is that right?
Yeah, India doesn't have as many statisticians. I wish it would have
seriously
more. I don't do statistics a lot. Data science has changed a lot since like it has changed more from statistics to computer science now. But yeah.
Well, I'm sure there's been more people after watching this video at some point in the future. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Soundarya, for having me, and have a great day ahead.
Hi again. Thank you so much for watching that. If you're not part of the Unshackled community yet, check unshackled.club to join hundreds of extraordinary immigrants and get access to free consults with lawyers, weekly events and masterclasses, a resource hub, discussion forums, and most of all, a roadmap to reach your goal. Thank you.